no bill or amendment seeking to amend the Termination of Pregnancy Act 2018 is allowed to be introduced. Mr Speaker, this morning we heard about a number of disgraceful scare campaigns waged by those opposite, but there was none more disgraceful than the one waged against the Termination of Pregnancy Act. And this motion today ends the disgraceful campaign. Queenslanders said no to a US-style scare campaign. Queenslanders said no to politicising a sensitive issue, and Queenslanders said no to the re-election of a very bad Labor government. From day one, I was asked about this issue, and I said from day one it was not part of our plan. I said there will be no changes. And despite that, Labor knew this, and despite that, the social media tsunami, the grubby phone calls continued unabated. They spent millions of dollars on a disgraceful scare campaign. And I want to speak directly to those people who were victims of the scare campaign, many of them young women.
Sorry, Premier, but there is way too much noise in this chamber.
Many of them young women, first-home voters, many of them people I know well. And I say to those young women, today the scare campaign ends. Yeah. Labor knew this wasn't on the agenda, but they did it for grubby political purposes. Labor didn't care about a woman's right to choose. It was all about Labor's desperate right to rule. That's what this was about.
Member for Aspley.
The level of desperation and insincerity on a sensitive issue was a disgrace.
Member for Logan is warned.
Today those opposite are exposed for the disgraceful campaign they ran. And it was rammed home to me, Mr Speaker, about how grubby and how disgraceful it was on election day when I met Anna from Ipswich West. And she said to me, I was going to vote for the LNP for change, and I'll explain why I didn't. When I received the first phone call, I thought, it can't be true. And then a second and a third. Anna's best friend's daughter had had an abortion. And those opposite preyed on people like Anna. Disgraceful, disgraceful, disgraceful. Labor didn't care about a woman's right to choose. It was about Labor's desperate right to rule. That's what this was about from day one. And it was wrong because it was untrue. That's right. It was wrong because it preyed on people's vulnerability. It was just plain wrong. And for those opposite, for 4 years, we will remind every one of you about what you ran. Every one of you, for 4 years. And Mr Speaker, something else makes a lot of sense as to the fact that this was never an issue about something that they cared about.
Member for Bundaberg, you are now warned.
About politics. And I'll tell you why, Mr Speaker. In the address and reply, you've barely heard about it. You barely heard about it. In fact, the only thing mentioned less than this in the address and reply was a thank you to the member for Murrumba. Because there were more references to thanking Wayne Swan than there was to the member for Murrumba in the address and replies. Barely a mention of this. And it shows you everything you need to know. This was never about the issue. It was US style, it was grubby. And for the next 4 years, you'll all hang your head in shame. Every one of you. And Mr Speaker, in 4 years' time, Queenslanders will get a chance to pass judgment on a government that will do the things it says
on my left,
and an opposition that won't be able to run that scare campaign again. They won't be able to run the same grubby campaign because Queenslanders have seen it. They've been exposed. And today we have highlighted all of those scare campaigns. But only one scare campaign was so personal, vitriolic and based in mistruths that it has exposed once and for all why Queenslanders said no to a US-style campaign, said no to the scare and innuendo, and said no to a very bad Labor government.
Mr. Speaker.